All right, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. We have a very special returning guest, and I will let him introduce himself to you now.
All right. Hi, Molly. It's great to see you again. My name is Dr. Daniel Fox. I'm a psychologist here in Texas, and I specialize in personality disorders, specifically narcissistic and borderline personality disorder. I have several publications as well as an ongoing and active YouTube channel as well. Thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Yes, everyone has loved our episode, and I've had so many new listeners come to the podcast because they found me via your YouTube channel. So I really appreciate that. And I know you'll be posting this on YouTube, and I appreciate all of your listeners and watchers because I don't typically post YouTube because I'm very reclusive with my podcast. So it's just nice to spend some on like face-to-face video time. So I'm really excited to have you back again, Dr. Fox. So
Great.
we are going to be talking about lots of stuff today. In our last episode, we kind of talked about my personal journey with BPD and identifying with those traits. So I'm sure if listeners want to hear more about my story and how I got involved with that, they can go back and listen to our first episode, because I really wanted to talk today about your work. And also I have some listener questions that have been submitted via the podcast that I'd love to play. But first, let's talk a little bit about, you have a book that you've been busy because you have a book that you've put out this year called Complex Borderline Personality Disorder, and then an upcoming BPD card deck. But I'd really love to talk a little bit about your newer book. Many of my listeners have read or have used your borderline personality workbook. It's a very commonly referenced book that my listeners bring up. But your newer book, Complex Borderline Personality Disorder, I finished, and it was just so fantastic. And I'd love to ask you, what inspired you to want to write about complex BPD? Because so many people know about complex PTSD, but what inspired complex borderline personality disorder as a topic?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, and that's a great question. And I think so the impetus for that book was actually that in talking with a lot of individuals, whether it was on podcasts or whether it was for interviews or for articles or things of that nature, people seemed to conceptualize BPD that, oh, if you have BPD, then that encompasses all those other issues, all that depression, all that PTSD, all of these other factors. And it seemed like that they were sort of limiting their perspective on just BPD. And it's like, well, but if you do that, you're missing additional components. And the way that I conceptualize BPD, and as well as, some of the big writers in the field, whether it's Marsha Linehan or it's John Gunderson and others, we see it as a dual construct, not a single construct. And what that means is that there's two layers, right? You have core content and surface content. And I think that if you look at BPD as BPD alone, which is like just one thing, if you have BPD, then you have BPD and there's nothing else associated with it, you miss the mark. And I think that adds to the difficulty in not only diagnosis, but in treatment as well. So when I do consultation sessions with individuals who are trying to identify issues that they're having or other mental health issues they may have, or they want to confirm if BPD is actually present or not, when we do that, there more often than not, there are additional comorbid conditions. And so I thought, well, how can I write this in a way that not only can convey this information to the clients, but also the mental health practitioners as well? I think because there's nothing out there that looks at BPD as well as those comorbid conditions, which is ADHD, psychosis, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, dissociation, dissociative identity disorder. And I'd like to say it as a caveat, so I don't have a whole chapter just on dissociative identity disorder, but we do talk about within the issue of psychosis and detachment that happens. But you can't just say, oh, well, dissociation is part of BPD, so it encompasses only BPD. Well, it's an oversimplification of a very, very complex disorder. So I think that all of us, whether we're mental health providers or clients, have to look at the complexity of BPD and understand that there's a greater likelihood of comorbid conditions that have to be addressed. And those comorbid conditions really do determine that trajectory of treatment based on what comorbid conditions are present.
That's fascinating. And I loved how you structured the book because it was every single different comorbid condition. You sort of told like a vignette about what the patient would um, appear like if they just had just that condition. So maybe like bipolar, for example, we'll take, and I think bipolar is a good example because I feel like a lot of us who identify with BPD have been at one point misdiagnosed, maybe with something like bipolar. I feel like I've heard that a lot. I myself was diagnosed with bipolar 2 when I first kind of found myself in the mental health system. And I love that you gave the vignette of here's how a person may display with simply bipolar, and then here's what it would look like with BPD and bipolar. And just, I guess maybe it's just me and everyone learns differently, but seeing it in those vignettes and seeing those subtle differences of how they're like, I don't like to use the word breakdown, but it's kind of like they're a really big crisis point. You know, you kind of displayed like what their crisis points would look like and how it differed. And that just was a really interesting perspective. And I feel like it helps people understand it more, so much more than just academic terms.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and thanks. And that was really the point, is I wanted to make it, consumable for folks who may be in that situation, who may be unsure. And people write me often through the YouTube channel and say, well, I've been diagnosed with, PTSD, bipolar disorder, bipolar 2. And the research, it depends upon which sect you're kind of looking at. And people have said, well, borderline personality disorder isn't real because it's really just bipolar 2 disorder. But if you put the criteria next to BPD, you realize that they're vastly different. And I think that we need to educate not only the mental health community, but also the consumers, like just like yourself, of mental health assistance and what type of mental health assistance is out there and who knows what. But a lot of times, even with BPD, we're still fighting that stigma. And I think the more genuine information we can put out there, the less that stigma is perpetuated, even though it is also perpetuated in graduate schools as well. And that's a big problem. So a lot of my work is really geared towards lessening that stigma, adding the sense of reality, that remissions, 80% of individuals with BPD experience remissions. And out of that 80%, only 15% will experience a resurgence of symptoms. Now, it's just not going to happen overnight, but if you look at within a 10-year period, if people knew, okay, look, you're diagnosed with BPD and you may have bipolar disorder, for example, we have to get the bipolar under control first. You're going to waste a lot of valuable therapy time by just focusing on BPD. Say, oh, well, this is BPD. So here are, perhaps some DBT strategies, or here are some general psychiatric management approaches. But they're not successful if you can't get that bipolar disorder under control. So you're constantly having those episodes of hypomania, mania, as well as depressive episodes. But individuals with BPD experience what are called depressive spirals. Depressive spirals are not major depressive episodes. So you have to get those under control. But then to throw another wrench in the machine, now bipolar disorder is different than major depressive disorder. Major depressive disorder doesn't have the high highs, even though it's part of bipolar disorder. So I'm trying not to muddy the waters too much, but individuals with BPD are exceptionally likely to experience major depressive disorder. But all individuals with BPD experience depressive spirals. So what happens is a depressive spiral it's a low, but not a low that interferes with your ability to take care of your kids or your family or yourself, but a major depressive disorder does. So it's worse, but we're going to see those depressive spirals. And I think what a lot of mental health providers see is that they see, oh, well, here's this depressive spiral, so you're getting into a major depressive episode. But that isn't true, because over time, with skills, you can manage the depression. Now, I'm not saying any people should stop their medication or anything like that, but if an individual has BPD and major depressive disorder, not bipolar, because bipolar needs to be controlled first, but if it's major depressive disorder and BPD, the BPD drives the major depressive disorder. So that's where we would address BPD first to lessen the major depressive disorder. So it's so different based upon what those comorbid conditions are. And I think that the vignettes hopefully, provided that. It's not like it provided that for you, and that's awesome. That was exactly my goal, is to clarify. If everything I said, sounds a little like what, just go back and re-listen. Go back and pair it with, okay, oh, this is what he's saying. So bipolar, those symptoms like psychosis need to be controlled first, but there are particular comorbid conditions that are driven by the BPD. So BPD has to be addressed first. And that's why, the book, I really tried to just lay it out. And then I think in the last chapter, it's like, well, there isn't just going to be one comorbid condition. What do you do when there are multiple comorbid conditions? And so I address that as well, because that's also likely. It's not, again, BPD is a complex disorder. And I think we need to see it that way.
I think that it's really interesting too, because we can't exactly even pin down. Oh, great.
See, well, your dog agrees. Your dog agrees.
We just had a tiny little cat and dog fight. The cat and dog were fighting over the same toy. It's a big meltdown.
I thought they had differing views. I thought maybe they were like, no, it's the same. BPD is the same. Like maybe your cat and dog are discussing.
We've got some disagreement in the ranks over here, Dr. Fox. But yeah, I think that the idea, it's funny because BPD on its own is complex. So BPD is complex no matter what. And I feel like for me, what I liked about the book is I think it's so easy for people like the layperson, like myself, at least, especially for those of us who lean towards the more neurotic side, which I certainly do. In the beginning, I was like, I need to find out exactly what I have. You know what I mean? And if I don't have the exact diagnoses, and I think what I've at this point, like 3 years down the line, after I've just kind of been working on myself, and I'm more okay with just reading the stories of other people and reading what I identify with more, and reading, and it helps me understand maybe why certain types of therapies didn't resonate with me as much as others. And I'm less focused on finding out exactly what my different disorders are, and more focused on resonating with the stories of others. And it helps me feel seen and heard, and also seeing that we're all wired so differently. Like our temperaments are all so different. Some of us are more impulsive, and some of us are more, maybe like OCD leaning. I don't know if I had another expert on my podcast since you've been on, Dan, named Anita Federici. She talked about the concept of over control and under control, like emotional control temperaments. And that was a pivotal moment in the podcast. I got a ton of emails about that because people said they hadn't heard of that concept, and it really helped them. And I feel like your book is a really nice companion to all that too. It's just really appreciating how differently we're all wired, and how one thing that works amazingly for someone, and maybe one therapist that works a certain way, could be great for someone, and another person that goes to them could maybe feel like broken and unfixable. But it's just a matter of it's not the right ingredients.
Yeah. Yep. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And in many ways, it's like finding, a non-intimate partner, right? It's, when you're finding that mental health provider, there's going to be people who don't understand BPD. There are mental health providers who are afraid of it, and there's some who understand it and are, willing to work on it. So it's finding that mental health provider who suits you. But the issue, of course, with BPD is that tendency to have that externalized validation, right? So you go to this mental health provider who's supposed to be perhaps an expert or understands BPD, and you go there and they're like, oh no, I don't work with that. And you're like, well, what? So you internalize that to mean, oh, I must be so broken and so horrible no one will work with me. Then it becomes generalized. But that isn't the case. It's certainly difficult and challenging to find somebody who is good, I think, at treating BPD. But I think it can be quite challenging to find a good mental health provider. So I think, and I'm not saying there's a lot of bad ones out there, but just like you're saying, find ones that fit.
It's also just, people are different. It's not like someone is a bad mental health practitioner, but there are better ones than others. There are better doctors than others. There's a better um, massage therapist than others. Some
Right.
people throw a lot of time and energy and passion into continuing education. I remember, and then some people don't. I remember going, even when I was in school, you could tell, even as a kid, the teachers that were really passionate about what they did, and then the teachers that kind of stopped caring like 10 or 15 years ago, and they've been teaching the same curriculum, and I feel like mental health providers are no different. Some people continue their education passionately, and some kind of remain stagnant.
Yeah, yep, and they float. They kind of they're burned out, so they just float down. And I also do trainings with mental health providers, and I always talk about. I said, when we work with clients that are along any personality disorder spectrum, mental health providers are at a higher likelihood of burnout, and they need to be aware of it. And you need to look at certainly those identifiers. But then I tell them, Wells Fargo or whoever holds your mortgage doesn't care if you're burnt out or not. So from the mental health provider perspective, like I understand that need to keep seeing clients, but it's our job as ethical mental health providers to be aware of it and to adjust. Sometimes it's adjusting our schedule. Sometimes it's limiting our schedule. I mean, that's something, that I'm starting pretty soon. Is I'm going from 7 days a week to 3 days a week.
You work 7 days a
Because,
week, Dan?
yeah, I work 7 days a week, about 14 hours a day. And
Wow.
some days it's only 9 hours a day, Molly.
Oh,
So
you
that's
underachiever,
like
you.
bonuses. Yeah. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. And
Wow.
but in order for me to take care of myself, and before I get sick, I believe that we should be more preemptive, which
Mm.
is, certainly in the US and in Europe, we're very reactive. And I think if you look at it from a BPD perspective, that reactive is really problematic, because then you get stuck with short-term rewards, long-term consequences. But if you can be preemptive, you can manage those things and increase the likelihood and probability of short-term rewards and long-term rewards. So for me and other mental health providers, I think we have to look at, wait, are we getting burnt out? And if we are, how can we adjust that? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's adjustment in lifestyle, things like that. But if we don't do it, but yet we preach to our clients self-care, having value, and all this other stuff, if you're not living it, you shouldn't be preaching it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my perspective. I can tell you that my clients are not pleased with me, shortening my work day, but I think I'll be able to maintain the level of care.
Yes.
And the last thing I want to do is start to just float.
Yeah. And I think I also want to extend a ton of compassion and empathy out to mental health providers too, because there are some that are in, public systems, like social workers and people that have like huge caseloads, and they are unable, even to decrease that work. We have such overwhelmed and underfunded systems everywhere in the world, and it's just so difficult, and it's not good for the practitioners or even the people seeing them. So
Yeah,
my
and then
heart goes out to them.
absolutely. And what's interesting, so yesterday we were doing an assessment in my practice with a gentleman, and his husband was there, and they've been together 22 years. And this individual has very, very severe medical issues and things like
Mm.
that. And so we're going through the assessment, and he's like, I'm trying to hang on to my insurance, and I don't take insurance. And he's like, we've been saving up to come and see you. And he has, he has breathing tubes, and he has a walker, and he's my age. I mean, he's 52, and his partner, his husband is helps him function throughout the day. And it's
Mm,
like, wow, we're in the wealthiest country in the world. And it's not like we're newly wealthy, right?
yeah,
But our healthcare system is deplorable.
it is.
And and certainly, we can blame, the politicians and Senate. And I'm not going to get political, Molly. I'm not going to do it. But what I'm
It's
just going to
okay,
say
me neither.
is I think that it's us. I think that we need to vote. I think that we have to become more involved.
Yeah.
And if we're not involved, then we don't have a voice. I mean, you can sit home and complain all you want, but you have to get out and do something. And that's very similar to BPD treatment as well. It's like,
Yeah.
we can take in a lot of information, but we have to have a sense of activation. And I recognize that's hard, especially when you have that family in the head, right? It's that chorus that's in your brain that's saying you have no value, that you are broken, that see, no mental health providers want to work with you. See, you don't have insurance, no one's going to see you, no one is going to do this, that, or the other thing. And but we have to learn to push back on those things, as hard
Yes.
as it is. And getting over managing, dealing with BPD is exceptionally difficult, but not
Absolutely.
impossible.
No, it's not. And I feel like I was a musician in when I was about 10 or so years ago. I had record label interviews. Like I had a manager when I was living in LA and London, but I remember going to different meetings and I was turned down so many times. And I'd written a ton of music, and sitting there in front of people that are judging you and playing your music and having them, and then waiting for the decision afterwards and hearing no, 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 especially that was at the height of like my BPD symptoms, I think. And I had no idea what it was really going on. So can you even imagine just like that rejection at such a grand scale of like showing your most vulnerable work, like your songs you've written?
Right.
And but I kept going and going and going. And finally, I ended up like getting to a label meeting and they loved my stuff. Right. And I didn't ever end up signing a record deal. And in retrospect, I'm really glad I didn't, because I could do a whole episode on how messy the entertainment industry is. But needless to say, a bunch of different groups of people really didn't like or connect with my music. And then if I would have stopped, I wouldn't have made it to the time where I found the group of people that really did. And I feel like it's a nice metaphor for mental health treatment too, right? You could go to a bunch of different therapists and then the right one is the right fit. You have to keep going until you find the right fit and not take no for an answer or you're broken for an answer. Because if you hear you're broken or you're ugly from one person, that's just one person's opinion. That doesn't
Yep.
define you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so uh I won't say her last name, right? But so we'll talk about Jill. So Jill, right, when I was in middle school, a big crush on Jill, and I saved up all my money and I bought this gold bracelet, right? So I saved up all my money, and I had a big crush on Jill, and I went in, and I gave it to her because in the morning of middle school, she was one of the helpers and she would help, the teacher and stuff. So I would go in there, I got up this courage, and so it's like the early 80s, so I got a big fro going on and all this other stuff. I'm really styling as much as I possibly could for early 80s.
Amazing.
And, so I go in, and she comes to the door, you knock on the door, she comes to the door, she opens it a little bit. She says, hey, we were kind of like friends, we'd see each other in the hallway, what's up? And so I gave her the box, and I remember she opened it and she looked so like just freaked out, weirded out. And I interpreted, of course, that, oh, right, she didn't like me and stuff like that. And she didn't. And then she said,
She didn't.
I don't want it. And she didn't. And she didn't want it. She gave it back to me, and stuff like that. And I remember like just being heartbroken. And I was talking to my dad, and I said, I'll probably, no one wants to date me, and da 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 da. All those early right
Yeah.
self-doubts and fears and stuff.
Yeah.
And I
You'll be
was
alone
working.
forever. Every
Right.
girl will hate you forever.
That's right. The entire female population of the planet has just rejected me because I saved up my money for this pretty little gold bracelet.
Oh,
And
that
my
makes
dad
me
said to
so
me,
sad.
I know.
Oh,
It works out. There were women
Jill, come on,
who liked me.
Jill.
I know, Jill. Chill. What's up? But what my dad said is, he goes, one girl, she may not like you, but if you keep asking, and you keep pursuing people, and you approach people, from the heart with genuine concern and
Mm,
genuine, interest, like someone will like you. So 10 people may say no, but you only need one to
yes.
say yes. And so if you find 10 quality, mental health providers, or that you presume to be qualified, and let's say they're afraid of BPD, or they can't handle it, or they got their own issues, whatever it is, and
Mm-hmm.
they say no, you only need that one good record label, that one good Jill, to
Yep.
accept the gold
The gold
bracelet.
bracelet.
So find your Jill, or no, get away from your Jill, but find
Yeah. Run away from your Jill and find the right one.
that's right.
The
That's
right Jill.
right. That's right.
That's a
But
beautiful story, and you really do. You have to, just because one person says something, it doesn't say anything about you. That's another thing that I've been focusing a lot on recent episodes is this idea of zooming out, and not personalizing everything so much. It's so easy to make everything so much about us and our tiny little world. And it's very, very common. And it's been happening for thousands of years, back to the Stoic philosophers of saying, zoom out, don't personalize things so much. Think of things in a bigger context. And just because someone, even the best BPD therapist, you could come up to them on their worst possible day where maybe their marriage is breaking down, and you call them up and they're like, I'm not taking any new clients. And I know that back in my like most emotionally dysregulated state, I would have been like, I would have made that all about me, and we never know what's going on with people. And all we can do is be a good advocate for ourselves and keep pushing.
yep, absolutely, absolutely, and recognizing that it's that family in the head. Lorna Smith Benjamin talks about that family in the head. It's that chorus that we have in our head that can perpetuate our pathology, whether it's BPD or other factors or issues that someone's contending with. But also, we can change the voice. We really can. And we're such adaptive creatures. Like I use the example of cigarettes, right? Is that, I mean, I think cigarettes are gross and I don't smoke, but everyone's allowed, their own choice. But 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 our body will adapt to even ingesting poison.
Mm,
When you have your first cigarette, right? Your body coughs. It's like, this is gross. It's gross. We don't want it. We don't want it. But then if you keep doing it, your body's like, oh, okay, we're gonna do this, and it'll adjust. It'll adapt. But it can be the same thing for positive things as well. Just like
mhm.
working out. Like if you're exercising, right about that, fourth, fifth time, you go to the gym, it's that voice in your head that's like, this sucks. I don't want
So
to do this.
true.
Let's go home. Let's watch, Netflix or whatever, and
Mhm.
go back. But if you push through, then your body's like, oh, okay, we're gonna do this. Like your
Yep.
brain will adapt to what you want it to. But if you see it as an enemy, as something you're not aligned with,
Yeah.
then I think you're scratching up just up a pole that, I mean, it's just almost impossible to surmount.
It's
And
so
I talk
true.
with my clients all the time about that. There's three people in therapy, right? It has to be me, you, and BPD, because we have to separate BPD from the individual. Because when people say, oh, I'm
Yes.
BPD, I immediately correct them and say, no, you have BPD. Right. And,
Right.
and I think we talked about this in the
Or
first.
like, I am a borderline. I even go further with it because I say, like, I identify with the traits of BPD, right? I even take it even a little bit further than that. Like, I don't even say that I have it because I feel like but everybody's different too. I think that's really important because
Of
saying I
course.
have could also be very empowering for someone. But I found that like it helps me to say I identify with the traits and the symptoms of it,
Mhm.
because then I feel like, I don't know, it just feels a little less, it feels separate from me?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And from who you are, it's something
Yeah.
that you're contending with. But I
Mhm.
think when we attach it to our sense of self, right, then it's really hard. And when we talk about like alignment, sometimes, like if my clients are having a very difficult time, or there's been a resurgence in symptoms, or something has happened, where they've had issue of abandonment, or that emptiness is exacerbated for whatever it may be,
Mm.
and then it feels like in session, I'm like, okay, I'm the only one pulling forward, and I'll bring it to their attention. There has to be immediacy where you're saying, well, wait, I think I think it's kind of me against you and BPD. I said, you and I have to align against it. We gotta go against that family in the head that is so negative and so
Yes.
pejorative, and we have to push back on it. And when we're aligned, then we're identifying, those internal statements, that internal critic. We're going against, we're reframing all of that self-hate. We're reframing all that sense of brokenness. Brokenness may exist, but so does super glue, right? So
Yeah.
it's the same thing. I mean, we got to put it together. And if you feel that way, then let's explore it. Let's pull it apart, because that's not what BPD wants you to do. BPD wants you to say, well, you're broken, and you just eat it on a regular basis.
Yes.
Well, it's time to spit it out.
Ah, yeah, it's so true. I love that. It is time to spit it out. Well, this is actually a perfect segue to one of the listener questions that I have, because it's all about shame, like the shameful feelings that come with BPD. So this voicemail is from Nicole. So I save them. I'm going to play them, and I think that should be good audio quality. Here we go.
Hi, Molly. I am Nicole. I'm called from Spain. I'm 26 years old. I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD and BPD traits. I just wanted to ask you, like, how do you deal with shame or guilt from like mistakes or people you hurt in the past when you didn't have control over your emotional dysregulation? Um, like, how do you make amends with yourselves and others? I feel like a big part of my recovery is that I have problems dealing with the shame or guilt of the stuff or the people I've hurt in the past. I mean, part of it is I've taken responsibility and I apologize, but I feel like, I don't know, it's difficult for me to move past the shame or guilt from it. How do you what strategies do you use to not feel like a bad person? I love your podcast, and I really appreciate your feedback from this.
Okay. So thank you so much, Nicole, for reaching out. And so, Dan, what's your reaction to that? I get questions like that a lot, of people are at this pivotal moment where they go, oh, wow. I call it the I am the problem moment, but the kind of like the good I am the problem moment, not in a shaming way, but going like, whoa, maybe I'm the common denominator in a lot of my chaos. That was true for me. Again, not speaking for anyone else. I just had this moment where I just thought that I had this chaotic life, and I attracted all these horrible people to me. And then I realized, wait, I'm also part of these dynamics. And when I looked honestly at it, I realized, yes, I had been hurt, but I had also hurt people. And then having that moment of self-awareness is empowering, but I feel like people don't talk enough about the pain, the initial pain and guilt that comes with that first moment of self-awareness. And I felt like Nicole really articulated that well. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, no, and I think that it's developing really good insight. I think it sounds like that Nicole is certainly developing her degree of insight. She's recognizing certainly her influence over her behaviors and her influence on those around her as well. And the thing that I picked up from that she mentioned several times was, what can she do about it? How can she manage that shame for and to use her description, the mistakes that she made, or people that she has hurt. One of the things about BPD, again, to go back to that family in the head, right? That chorus. So her chorus is very loud at this time, right? But she has the initial ingredient, which is insight. A lot of individuals with personality disorders, the common denominator across all personality disorders is lack of insight. And it's hard to work with an individual who doesn't recognize the insight and then take that second step, which she has done, which is to recognize, hey, I can change things because I have to take some responsibility, but how do I do that? Because the shame can be so overwhelming. And I think the first thing that I would recommend is that, so she recognizes what is that family in the head telling her? And that family in the head could very well be mom, dad, brother, sister, cousin, lover, friend, boss, whoever it may be. And because it's not just one individual, it's this chorus that's inside of her that's telling her, how could you do that? I mean, you did that because you're broken. You did that because you're stupid. You did that because you're this, or this. And that just continues to feed that BPD. So if we pull that BPD outside of her and we're like, okay, so now she can deal with it. It's not who she is. It's regrettably something that she's contending with. So I think she needs to look at it and say, okay, wait, what are the things that I'm saying to myself? How do I engage in self-forgiveness? First of all, I think we have to recognize everybody makes mistakes. I mean, it happens to everyone for various reasons. Doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're a horrible person. And I think that we have to look at that, and she has to say, okay, wait, so it doesn't mean, that you don't take responsibility, but you do. But you look at it and say, wait, I don't think that I deserve a punishment plan for it, which is a term that I use when people, they punish themselves to a point where they've suffered enough, and then they allow themselves to feel better. The problem with that is that it is re-engaging in old patterns of very early abusers that tended to be internalized. And we want to break that. That's part of what feeds that BPD. So I would say that she needs to first forgive herself and say, you know what, everybody makes mistakes. And she mentioned about going back and taking ownership of it. Man, that is amazing. That is really hard to do because it's super scary, particularly because that family in the head is telling you what, well, if you apologize, they're going to rip you from one end to the other. I mean, they're going to let you have it. And I think that that's very telling of the people that, easy to say, hard to do, of people who should be in your life. Everybody's going to make mistakes. And if somebody punishes you for taking ownership, then is that somebody you should really have in your life? I mean, and sometimes that's mom, dad, brother, sister, cousin, people that you want in your life. And we have to then realize, how do we insulate ourselves from those things? And I mean, I could go on for really long with this one, because I think that this is something really common for folks with BPD. And just so to nutshell it, what I would say is first, she has to engage in self-forgiveness. You have to call out that family in the head that's telling you, you shouldn't have done it. You were wrong to do that. You're a horrible person. No, you're not. You're a person. And everybody makes mistakes. And and we go and, we can make reparations, which is you go back and you apologize. But when you apologize, then I think we have to say, okay, how do I not do it again? And that's where going from maladaptive behavior, because typically what perpetuates BPD are those maladaptive patterns, which could be screaming, yelling at somebody, throwing something at somebody, hurting yourself in order to try to hurt someone else, something like that. I think that we have to switch those to adaptive strategies. And that is taking reparations, going and apologizing and saying, look, I shouldn't have done that. And, it's my mistake, for example, and I'll take full ownership, so last night, my wife helps me with my practice. And right now I'm just overloaded with assessments and things. I said yes too many times, Molly. Sometimes we do that, don't we? We just say yes. And so now I'm kind of dealing with the tail end of that. But so she was explaining while I'm writing a report, she's explaining about, oh, this needs to be on this. And I snapped at her, and it wasn't loud or anything, but it was snappy. And then, so when I finished with that report, I went and I apologized. And she said, oh, you know what? It's okay. I know you're under a lot of stress. And I wrote back to her because we were texting because she was out of the house. She didn't run out of the house because of my snap. She had somewhere to go. But just to clarify. And I said, well, it's not okay. And it's something, that this is telling me that, I need to make change, right? Because the people in my life, I don't want to snap, right? I want to have greater sense of control. And this goes back to your listener. It's making those changes. Recognizing when you're overloaded, recognizing those situations, and not falling into those BPD maladaptive patterns, but using adaptive ones, challenging that chorus that's in your head, and also accepting yourself that you're a person. And people make mistakes.
They do. And I feel like Nicole isn't giving herself enough credit, I feel like sometimes we can be such rigid taskmasters to ourselves, like it's never enough. Like what we're doing is never enough, because contrary to what's often said about people who identify with BPD is that we're not evil, manipulative, awful creatures that want to see people suffer. Quite often, following behaviors that we regret, we have like horrible, I call them like shame spirals, where it's just like ruminating and ruminating. But I think that if I can share anything with Nicole, just as someone on the lived experience side, is all that you can do is apologize and then show differently in your actions in the future. And I feel like when you apologize to someone, for me back in the past, when I exploded, I had a hard time taking ownership for it. I felt like I had to double down on it so that I would not feel stupid, so I would snap at my partner and he would be like, and I would get even angrier because I'm like, I'm not going to say that like, wow, I shouldn't have snapped. So I had to like justify, like, you should have probably been nicer to me, or you know what I mean? And now I will immediately just say, I'm really sorry. I snapped. I'm feeling really stressed. This is not about you. I'm just going to go take a minute and like listen to some music. And he's like, oh, and immediately what that does for the other person, it doesn't take away us snapping, but it almost immediately makes it better for them because they go, oh, it's not about me. Like it's not, because we need to give them the gift of because our partners are not perfect and they take a lot of emotional beatings when we are even in recovery, you know what I mean? Because it's constantly asking, did I do something to trigger that? And often we're with people that are very highly attuned to our emotional states because they feel like they may be walking on eggshells. And I feel like the gift we can give them is, look, I'm working on this. I'm so sorry. This is not about you. I love you. I'm going to come back when I feel a little bit more calm. And I've even asked Zaz, my partner, to say, it feels like you might be like snapping. Have you like assessed your vulnerabilities? Like, I feel like maybe but we have a nice little plan where he just said, are you feeling overwhelmed? Like, like just kind of like reaching out to me in that moment to kind of, and even just that will prompt me to go, how am I feeling? Is my heart racing? Am I feeling really anxious? Like I need to remove myself and then come back to a state of calm and ask myself, I think a lot of us with BPD, we want so badly to connect, but our jump reactions are the exact opposite of connection. So I always say to my listeners, we have to take that time to create the space between our big feelings and our reactions. And if we can just decide in that little bit of space, in that moment, I want to connect with my partner, and my knee-jerk reaction of what I want to say is probably not likely to get me that connection that I want. So let me take a second to decide. And you can say to your partner, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. Can I take 5 minutes and then answer your question? And I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, your partner will say, yeah, of course. Like, take the time that you need. You don't have to respond right away to anything. You don't have to make a decision. And what I've learned is sometimes saying nothing is the best possible outcome. And that was never an option I took before. I always felt like I had to have the last word or say something. And that's been a game changer for me.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Should we take the next question?
A lot of great self-control. Yep.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Dan. I don't want to cut you off from your response.
I was just saying that it's great.
Yes, and also I want to say that's taken so long for me to get to the point where I can, and I still snap all the time, especially if I'm hungry or I'm overwhelmed, like you said, or if I am hormonal, even, like it's all these different things. And my therapist, Bev, who I no longer see now because I feel like I'm in a better place, but when I was in a crisis point, she always told me, assess your vulnerabilities, right? It's like, you really need to make sure that it's like being a good parent to yourself. It's like a little kid. Are you hungry? Have you slept? Like, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So I know that you have another client soon. So I want to make sure that we can at least get to another listener question. So I'm trying to think. Let's take this one. All right.
Hi, Molly. This is Andrea.
Sound is
from Fort Wayne, Indiana. I am a premium subscriber. I have previously sent you a voice message just to reiterate how much I appreciate everything you do. I have a question. Um, how did you open up dialogue and a conversation with your parents? Now that I'm getting older and like starting to look back on like how I was as a teenager, how my parents got along, and like how me and my mom like don't really have like that good of a relationship right now, just from all the trauma that she put me through, and honestly the trauma that I put her through as a teenager. I can't say that I'm innocent, and nor do I want to say that I'm innocent. I would like to put all my faults out on the table. It's just really hard for us to communicate. We've never been good at communicating. She was always like a friend and not a parent, but still someone that I didn't really talk to about things that you need to talk to your parents about. So yeah, my question was just, how did you open up that dialogue to have like a calm conversation, but still get out everything you felt, your perspective on your childhood, the trauma that you endured, and things like that. Thank you so much for everything you do. Love you.
So thank you, Andrea, for that. And poof, what a question, right? You know, I get also a lot of questions about this. And also like something I love about my listeners, they're so self-aware, right? Like it's really powerful to be evil to be even able to admit that, you know, I did some things wrong. My parents did some things wrong. I'm reading Gabor Mate's new book right now, The Myth of Normal. And he talked about how blaming parents, just, he said that there's just no point in the blame because, you know, a lot of times trauma goes so far back. What did their parents go through? What did their parents go through? And it doesn't absolve anyone of any big T trauma, like any horrible things that have happened. But again, it's like, I love how this listener is sort of taking a zoomed out approach, you know, saying like there were lots of different factors at play. I know that there are good ways of bringing up your childhood to your parents and not so great ways. I employed a not so great way, which was like basically screaming and exploding at my parents and saying, do you have any idea what you did to me? And I can tell you that conversation didn't go well. I have compassion for myself because I feel like I know that the really hurt child part of me came out in that conversation. But then I had a much more adult to adult calm conversation with my parents that came later, where I asked them if they would read a book, and, you know, and it was, and I was compassionate to what they had been through as children too. And I just asked if we could find a new way of relating to each other. And I asked them, I just need you to listen to me right now, and then you can respond. These are some things that I did. But I'd love to hear, I'm sure in therapy, you maybe help facilitate some of these conversations potentially, or help prepare your clients for them. So I'd love to hear your reaction to that question.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I commend you on doing that, Molly, because I think, you know, firstly, that BPD seemed to be driving that initial behavior, right? If I get enough hate out, and if you can make your parents swallow enough of the hate and pain that you feel, then you'll feel a sense of retribution and okay. But human beings, we don't really work that way, right? There isn't enough hate that you can espouse to someone and they swallow it, and then all of a sudden you're like, you can check that box and be like, well, that's it. That's not how human beings work. And I actually have several videos on my channel that address this: how to talk to a partner about it, how to talk to a parent about it. And I have had parents who have written me and who have said, you know, what can we do? You know, what are some things that they can do? And then others that have said, you know, we've watched your videos together, and, you know, my child and I, and we went through that. And we talk a lot about parents and where my clients are with their parents. And, you know, I think that we have a tendency to add a level of volition to our parents, which is that, you know, oh, well, you know, they meant to neglect me. They meant to do this and this. This was all intentional. It goes back to your statement, you know, about manipulation. The thing about manipulation, and what's confusing about it, is that for real manipulation, there has to be intent, right? Is that you have to intend to deceive someone, trick someone. The issue is with complex behaviors like in BPD, and I'm not saying that some folks aren't manipulative, but I'm certainly not saying everybody is. But with people who don't understand themselves and have unstable self-image, which is a component of BPD, they can come across as being manipulative, particularly when we associate it with high emotional reactivity. So if we're going to talk about something that is so core, such as our issue with our parents, or what they did to us, or what they allowed us, or as we perceive that they allowed us to experience, which can sometimes be abuse, neglect, a whole host of other factors as well. And I think that in talking to our parents, I think first we have to realize that what is our goal of that conversation? And you have to go into it without preconceived expectations, because that's going to give that family in the head a lot of opportunity to start playing with your brain. So I think that we have to say, look, what do you want out of it? But and I'm sorry isn't going to be enough. I'm going to tell you, I got another story for you, Molly. I got another story. So when I was on my internship, right, and there was a client who was transitioning from the previous intern to me, and I'd read the notes, and previously what they were working on was her confronting her father about the sexual abuse, and we won't go into any detail of what she experienced, but it really did affect how she saw herself, and how she treated herself. I mean, as you can imagine, when your abuser gets internalized, it becomes part of how you see yourself and how you manage yourself. So what they were working on is her getting up the courage, I got some air quotes here, courage to confront her dad. And when I was reading these notes, I'm like, oh my God, this is not good. Because the reason why it wasn't good is she empowered her abuser. Because what you're saying is you're going to go to your abuser and say, you abused me, you did this, this, and this, you owe me an apology, you owe me reparation, or whatever it is. But you're empowering the abuser. So my issue was, and ironically, is that she actually confronted her dad between the time that her old therapist left and I was coming in. So I'm coming into the aftermath of this, which I don't believe is clinically appropriate. I think it's fine to bring that up, to your abuser, confront your abuser, but don't. I think if we go into it with an expectation, you owe me an apology. Apologies are nice, but you can't say once you apologize, then I won't feel traumatized anymore. I will have contended and dealt with this sense of abuse, loss, hurt, pain, rejection, all that other stuff. So she confronted her dad, and so this might be hard. So some people may want to skip it, but it's also genuine. And her dad said to her, I don't know what you're complaining about. You liked it. Oh. And so she comes to me, it's completely distraught, right?
And that could, I'm sure, upend so much progress in therapy, just that one moment, I would imagine.
Because she had empowered him, right? She empowered him again, because it was like, well, give me that, take your ownership of the horrible things you did. And of course he didn't. And then, then we're going through, massive regression, cutting, suicide watches, inpatient stays. I mean, all the, and so what,
and you can understand that,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So what we did is, so I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. So I told her, I said, we're going to wash out the past as best we can. Doesn't mean we're going to reject it, but we're going to wash it out. And that means we're going to be like, you know what? Because what I want you to do, and this is what I told her, I want you to empower yourself. That person does not deserve for you to empower them. You empower yourself, and you do that by saying, you know what? What you did to me was inappropriate. What you did was wrong, and you will not do it to me again. And it's an assertion, and it's a strength. Now that particular,
or continue to define my life, right? Yeah, like no longer will you. I've heard so much, Dan, lately. I've been wanting to do an episode on forgiveness, and I know there's so much of forgiveness is like a triggering topic in itself for people who struggle with mental illness, because it means like some things, like this woman that you worked with, some things are unforgivable. And I came across something like your parents actually abusing you, like telling someone to forgive that is just like, but I read something really beautiful about like, there's a difference between forgiving and like letting go and moving forward. And it's like what you said, it's almost like you're going to cleanse yourself of it, like, and like put yourself through like a washing machine speed cycle, like
Yep.
let it all go. And to say, I'll no longer let this define me anymore.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yes.
absolutely. And over
Yes.
the year that we worked together, because it was during my internship, which is just a year, and I'll tell you how it ends up in a second, because it's a good ending. But again, and I think to go back to your caller too, is that, I don't think that we should go and say, you did this, you did that, you did. I mean, that to me, that example is so intense and so extreme. But what I am saying is, to go back, the point of the story is that you can't empower those other people. We have to have conceptualizations of what you want out of discussing BPD or how you feel or your perspective with your folks.
Yeah.
Understand what you want out of it. And ultimately, I just believe that there's no sorry that's deep enough. I believe that as particularly if we're talking about, abuse, neglect, I mean, there's certainly extreme issues there, and we don't know about your caller, and we don't want to make any assumptions. But I think, what do we do to empower ourselves? How do you forgive yourself? What kind of things? And if you were difficult, and all teenagers are difficult to varying degree with
That's what I'm
parents,
saying.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, so we could link Nicole with your current caller too, right? Is that we got to forgive ourselves too. And sometimes what it is, it's explaining, look, I've been diagnosed with BPD. This is what it is. And please educate your folks and say, if you look it up, you're going to find a whole host of horrible things.
Yeah.
Here's
Listen
the
to
reality.
Dr. Fox with them, have a couple, like my listeners have a couple listen to this podcast episode right now, like play something, be prepared to give them the content you want them to see first, rather than have them, and even say, when you go out there, you're going to see some stigmatizing, awful stuff, but I need you to, for me, listen to these podcast episodes or these YouTube videos, and then can we talk about it or listen together? Sometimes having them just listen on their own allows people time to really process and absorb, instead of like sitting there and kind of like staring at them while they watch it.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And just to kind of tell you how it rounds out, because I think
What's the ending with this client?
She was a really good mechanic, and
Cool.
over the year, over the year that we worked together, we talked about her skill and embracing her skill. And she is one of the premier lowrider creators.
So cool.
There's a lowrider magazine or whatever, and stuff like that. But she creates like premium lowriders, and sometimes she'll be in the magazine or whatever. And man, she's just
So cool.
yes. I mean, there's no other way about it. And it goes back to empowering yourself. And you've got to, as hard as it is, you've got to have that sense of self-acceptance and appreciation, and say, you know what, these are my skills. This is what I'm good at. And this is what I got. And you know what? I'm going to make my mark using these things. And that's what she did. She's one of the strongest people I've ever met. And I admire the hell out of her.
And that just goes to show, Dan, that's another thing that I always love about interviewing you. You're so proud of your clients, and you just it's just so lovely. And I feel like anyone listening to, we talked about, and I know Dan won't toot his own horn because that's just not the kind of person that you are, but there are clinicians out there that will fight for you and don't buy into the stigma. They're out there, and you can find them. And I know that you have a client coming up again soon, Dan. No, it's totally fine. So I just want to leave the listeners with, we didn't get much of a chance to talk about your BPD card deck, but I want listeners to know that his BPD card deck is coming out, and I had a chance to review it myself, and it's fantastic. And that's another thing that I feel like you could kind of like go through the cards with someone that you love, like, and kind of, they're worded so softly and nicely, and it can really also help you in relation to someone else, say like, these are things that can help me. Can you help remind me to do some of these self-soothing activities? Can you remind me to maybe go pull a card? And so I'm going to make sure that I want to shout that out. And Dan, where can they buy the card deck? When does it drop exactly?
So it's next year.
Okay.
come out next year, but you can pre-order it on Amazon. So if you just look up me and you look up BPD card deck, it'll come up.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I know I apologize that we're getting cut short, Molly, but I mean I'd be happy to come back if you'd have me, and we can do.
You are
another
going
live if
to
you want.
100% be a returning guest. We will do more. I would love to have you on again to do more listener questions. So if you have a question for Dr. Fox, you can go to backfromtheborderline.com and click the voicemail, and I'll just start saving up those voicemails for the next time we have one. And for those of you who are meeting me for the first time on Dr. Fox's YouTube channel, you can find my podcast at Back from the Borderline. If you just go to backfromtheborderline.com, you can find all the different ways to listen for free. So I'll
And
link
we'll
all
also
those.
put a link to your podcast in the comment section for the YouTube channel. as well.
Perfect. So it's been such a pleasure, Dan, and thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with me and my listeners, and lovely to hang out with your listeners too. And I also
Yeah.
would like to apologize for those who are watching on video. My cat was causing absolute mayhem in the background. So I was like muting myself, trying to take all these things away from her. So if you saw
Cats
me
are
doing,
fun.
oh, if you saw me doing really distracting, like my eyes darting around, it was because I was like, please don't let my cat unplug my microphone. Now she's back, of course, being an angel and sleeping now at the end, but I digress. Well, good luck with your client, Dan, and I can't wait to have you on again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, Molly. Thanks for having me, and we'll
All right.
talk again soon.